Let's keep working on our select element that we have created in the previous lesson. And now we're gonna move markup, which represents select element, into its own component. And this component will also contain another component, which will be responsible for showing that button on the left. First of all, let's determine where this markup currently resides, in which component, and the component that we need is called timeline item. We're gonna go inside of that component, timeline item, and from here, within the template, we're gonna cut our markup, which represents select element, and call a new component BaseSelect. And usage of the base prefix in the name is one of the conventions, which is widely used to name so-called base components. And base components are those that will be widely used in the application. They usually represent base UI elements, such as buttons, drop-downs, form fields, etc. So for our needs, we're gonna make select elements base component as well. And this is why I have followed this naming convention in here. So let's create a new file with the name BaseSelect, paste markup of the select element in here, and inside of timeline item component, we will add import for this BaseSelect component. So now that xmark icon import is no longer used in this component, let's move it inside of BaseSelect component. We'll create new script tag and place import in here. And if we take a look at the template of this component, we will see that here we use variable options, which is currently not available in this component, because it is defined in the parent component timeline item. It is this options array. So that means we're gonna have to pass this data inside of the child component BaseSelect. And we do this by using props. Let's define one prop called options on the BaseSelect component and pass options array in here. Besides this prop, we will also use another prop that will let us specify text for the select box default option. And we'll call this prop placeholder and interpolate it in here. Go back to timeline item component and let's pass another prop placeholder with the text rest. And so as far as we know, we have to explicitly define those props that are going to be accepted. We do this by using macro define props. Right here we accept two properties with names options and placeholder. And if we take a look at Vue DevTools, by choosing BaseSelect component, on the right side we can see props section now contains two properties, options and placeholder, as expected. But also we'll need to have a way to specify from outside which select elements option should be selected by default. And we're gonna do this with the help of another prop, which we will pass to BaseSelect component. Firstly, let's define constant selected activity ID within timeline item component. This constant will hold the ID of the currently selected activity from the options array. For example, let's emulate a situation where the second activity is selected. And now let's pass this ID of the selected activity into BaseSelect component as a separate property with the name selected. And use constant name in here. Let's add one more entry inside of define props macro for this new property, selected. And now let's go down to the template, and on the option element, we're gonna use another attribute called selected. This is a default HTML attribute of the option element. And if this attribute will be true, that means current option element should become selected. And here we're going to use JavaScript expression to define which option exactly should be selected. And all we need to do in here is compare values within value variable and within selected prop. And if those two values are equal, that means that the current option element should become selected. And since this is a JavaScript expression, we should bind this expression to this selected attribute. So let's use the bind directive in here by using colon. Let's apply formatting to the file and remove attributes name and ID from the select element. Those are currently not needed anyway. And as we can see in the browser, currently selected activity is reading, because value of the selected property equals to 2, which is ID of the activity with a name reading. Let's test it with another activity. For example, let's specify here an ID of third activity, which in our case is training. And sure enough, we're gonna see that all select elements currently show training activity as selected. So now that we have moved markup of the select element into its own component, time to do the same with button markup. We're gonna extract button markup from here and use BaseButton component instead. This will also be used as a base component to represent all buttons in the application. So that's the reason why we also use prefix base for this component name. Let's go up and write an import statement for this BaseButton component. And after this, we're gonna create a separate file with the same name inside of the components folder. Create in here template tag and paste markup of the button. And then let's also add a script tag in here and move import of the xmark icon component within this script. And let's take a look at the tree of components within Vue DevTools. So inside of timeline item component, we have BaseSelect component, which contains BaseButton component. But since this button component should be reusable, currently it is not, because that icon which is used for this button is hard-coded directly within BaseButton component, which doesn't let us specify icon or button label from outside. And to make it possible, instead of directly hard-coding this icon in here, we're gonna use a special element slot. And at this place, whatever will be passed in between component tags is going to automatically be injected at the place of this slot element by Vue. And all we have to do right now is to specify desired markup within component tags. Let's add xmark icon markup in here, in between BaseButton component tags. And since this xmark icon component has been moved, we also have to move its import. And after this, from visual perspective, nothing has been really changed. But now we have an option to specify content for BaseButton component from outside, which makes our button component fully reusable. And now we can start seeing benefits of component architecture. We can create those atomic elements called components, and then combine those atomic elements to create bigger components. And this will be extremely helpful when our application will grow more and more. So now let's go back to BaseButton component, remove that empty script tag, and finish this lesson.